Welcome, dear listener, to another episode of Witchcrafting, where we wander the wild edges of myth, nature, and magic. I'm your host, Wishamaya, and today we're going to talk about 3 ancient, powerful substances that have been used for centuries to honor spirits, feed the gods, and enchant the unseen. Today, we are talking about milk, honey, and blood. These are not just ingredients, they're gateways. But before we go deeper, let's root ourselves in a grounding question to set ourselves up for the basis of this entire episode. And that question is, what is folk magic? Simply put, folk magic is the magic of the everyday people. It's not ceremonial, it's not elite, and it's not held behind the gates of temples. Folk magic is born in the kitchens and at crossroads. It's a newly woven symbol on the hem of an old skirt, iron nails in door frames, and whispered prayers over steaming pots. Folk magic is ancestral, it's regional, it's adaptive, and it's often deeply intertwined with offering practices, ways to honor spirits and protect the home, as well as influence unseen forces through symbolic exchange. In folk traditions around the world, offering is not bribery, it's relationship, reciprocity, a way to speak across the veil in the oldest language that there is, giving life's essence. With that as our cornerstone for today's episode, let's dive in. The act of giving to gods, spirits, or the dead is as old as humanity's sense of mystery. Offerings appear in prehistoric graves, in pagan altars, in biblical sacrifices, and even on modern-day ancestor shrines, as well as many, many other places. In ancient Mesopotamia, beer and bread were left out for the gods. Beer was a daily drink for folks in ancient Mesopotamia, and it was brewed using a very special type of twice-baked barley bread. This bread had the necessary natural yeasts and sugars that were needed to brew the beer. So these 2 staples were essential to the way of life and its continuance at the time. Offering these things to the gods would be a true sacrifice, both sacred and essential. In Egypt, milk, wine, incense, and meats adorned tomb and temple altars. In Greece, olive oil was a common offering for the gods, used to anoint and ritually purify those participating in religious ceremonies, and even sometimes to anoint the statues of the gods themselves. The Greeks were known for their skilled art of perfumery, and while olive oil was used for hygiene and bathing, heavily perfumed oils were used in specific ways for specific rituals, from aphrodisiac ecstatic dances and rituals to anoint the dead. In West African traditions, offerings remain central. Food, drink, feathers, even cloth, among many other things, are given to orishas, ancestors, and spirits. And in folk Catholicism, you'll find candles for every saint, honeyed cakes for the Virgin Mary, or rum and tobacco laid out for our beloved dead. Across cultures, oil, honey, wine, and blood were poured upon the ground or altar stones to consecrate the space as sacred. Why? Because these things are life. They nourish not only the body, but the spirit. To give food is to offer labor, energy, attention, and love. To offer blood is to offer your truest, most authentic you. To offer honey is to offer sweetness, something very hard to earn in a very harsh world. Milk is the first nourishment, the first offering we are going to talk about today. It's associated with birth, motherhood, fertility, and lunar power. It flows from mammals and goddesses alike, rich with symbolism and essential nutrients. In ancient Egypt, Hathor, the sky cow goddess of love and music, was called the Lady of Milk. Her priests and priestesses offered milk in golden vessels, believing that it came from the stars. Hathor's milk nourished both gods and dead souls in the underworld. In the Vedas of India, milk and ghee were offered into sacred fire as acts of both sacrifice and honor. In Ireland, Brigid, goddess of poetry, healing, and hearth, my girl, is associated with cows and fresh milk. During Imbolc, milk was poured onto the earth to awaken its fertility and bless the land. In Norse myth, Adumla was the primordial cow whose milk nourished Ymir, the first frost giant, and from whom the world was created. Creation itself began with the flow of milk. In ancient Greece and Rome, milk was poured at the base of sacred plants and trees, particularly those connected to the gods. The olive tree, sacred to Athena, and the fig tree, beloved by Dionysus, were both anointed with the milk, or with wine, or both, as a way of invoking divine favor. In Celtic folklore, milk is a preferred offering for the fair folk. Why? Because the Fae are old beings, and they once received regular household offerings before Christianity swept such traditions away. Milk left on doorsteps, in thickets, or by stone circles was said to keep the Fae happy and the household safe. Failing to offer milk to the Fae could provoke their mischief. Offering spoiled or diluted milk was seen as a major disrespect, and therefore quite dangerous. You never want to disrespect the Fae. And back before pasteurization, milk needed to be kept fresh in spring houses or in cool running water, or to be turned into butter, cheese, or yogurt so it didn't spoil, which could happen quite quickly if it was hot, or if you were poor and you didn't have a spring house or a stream nearby. So fresh offerings of milk were essential, but they also showed the Fae a true sacrifice and true care and reverence. Celtic traditions also speak of milk offerings to fairy trees, particularly hawthorns and oaks, which were believed to be portals to the other world, the realm of the Fae. Leaving a bowl of milk beneath these trees was thought to keep the Fae spirits appeased and ensure a bountiful harvest, as long as it didn't spoil before they found it. Probably worth the risk. The next traditional nourishment or folk offering we're going to touch on is honey. A few weeks ago, in the Spring Sweetness episode, I touched on liquid gold, honey. Honey is sweetness that is hard won, born of sunlight and the labor of bees. In ancient Greece, bees were sacred to Artemis, Demeter, and the Delphian Apollo, who all had priestesses referred to as Melissae, which literally meant bees. In Greek myth, Melissa was a nymph that discovered honey when the world was still new and without humans. She taught other nymphs the way of honey, and these nymphs eventually became the bees. The bees we have today, like literal bees. So these honey nymphs, and thus the bees, became known as Melissae, the plural form of Melissa. Honey was not taken for granted in Greece. It was seen as pure, divine, and incredibly precious. Beehives were kept and tended at the temples of Apollo, Artemis, and Demeter, and bees were essential parts of their cults. Demeter, specifically, was honored with cakes and honey to invoke abundance and to soothe sorrow. In both Greece and Rome, honey was poured on graves to soothe the spirits of the dead, and it was also used in chthonic rites, or offerings to the spirits of the underworld and the gods of the underworld as well. Lastly, before we move on from Greece, Aphrodite was often offered honeycombs and mead in her sensual Aphrodisian rites. Oshun, the Yoruba Orisha of rivers and beauty, loves honey, though it must always be tasted first, as her sacred stories warn of betrayal by poisoned offerings. In Egypt, they believed that honey held the essence of the gods, and they anointed sacred plants with it in temple rituals and rites. Meanwhile, in Slavic traditions, honey was poured over graves and into the roots of protective herbs like mugwort and wormwood, strengthening their ability to ward off evil. In Slavic traditions, honey bread and vodka are still left on ancestor altars today, especially at funerals or on All Saints' Day, which leads me into the use of honey in necromantic work. I've said it before on the show, but it's important to remember that necromancy is simply any and all workings that deal with the dead. Honey has a dual nature in necromancy. It can preserve and appease, especially when working with gentle or ancestral spirits. In the Familiars episode, I spoke about how some magicians choose to bind spirits. I don't recommend binding a spirit to do your will, but honey has been used to bind a spirit to a task, particularly when placed on seals or objects that were buried near graveyards and crossroads for spirit binding purposes. Sweetness, in this case, becomes a leash. Again, I don't recommend spirit binding as a common practice. The only time, and I mean only time, that I find it appropriate to bind a spirit is when they are harmful and all other methods have failed, or, for some reason, you are in an emergency with a harmful spirit. And even in an emergency, ideally, the spirit that you bound to control the situation would be unbound later on in another place and in such a way where they could do no more harm, but they could be freed. This is all very advanced magic, and it takes a lot of skill and preparation to do properly, so heed my words and proceed with caution when it comes to these kinds of things, and just beware. And now we move on to the oldest offering of all, blood. I have mentioned blood on the podcast before. I have mentioned blood magic many a time, and it's one that really tends to freak people out. But blood is sacred. It's an oath. It's truth. It's the song of the body. In nearly every culture, blood has been seen as a potent, binding, and dangerous material. In early European witch trials, blood pacts with spirits or the devil were central accusations. A witch, they said, pricked her finger to sign her name in blood. As we know, the witch trials were a tragic femicidal period of time, but the undercurrent of truth is there. the raw binding power of blood was already well known, enough to be used as fear propaganda. Another example of the twisting cruelty of the church. But we're not going to talk about that today. I want to focus in on the fact that blood was already well known in folk practices during the witch trials. However, to the people, blood wasn't devilish, it was powerful. Menstrual blood was and is used for grounding, protection, and binding. It's often associated with lunar cycles, fertility, and sovereignty. Some places isolate menstruating women with a negative viewpoint. A cultural belief that paints bleeding women as ritually impure is a taboo that is damn near global. However, there are also many traditional societies that revere and honor menstruation as a time of power. Both types of societies have some form of menstrual hut for the women on their bleed. This is a place that is held away from the male gaze and influence that menstruating women go to during their cycle. The cultural differences are what make one isolation and one retreat. Regardless of the viewpoint, the truly universal belief is that a woman is most powerful on her bleed. The Cherokee Native Americans believe that menstrual blood is the source of a woman's power, and that a bleeding woman is closer to spirit during her cycle, with enhanced psychic ability and even the strength to destroy enemies with the power of her menstrual blood. The Roman Pliny the Elder believed that a menstruating woman held the power of banishment in her menstrual blood. He wrote that a menstruating woman could simply reveal her body outdoors in the right place and banish hailstorms, whirlwinds, and lightning. But that's not all. She can go full fertility goddess and cause crop decimating pests like caterpillars and beetles to drop dead off of crops, simply by revealing her nakedness while she's on her bleed. How badass is that? In some African spiritual traditions of conjure and voodoo, blood is used in powerful charms that are intended to destroy or to purify. A call back to the historical dichotomy menstrual blood has always held in humanity's eyes. In many magical traditions, pricked blood from the finger or the tongue is used to seal spells, to awaken tools, or to feed spirit allies. It's often used sparingly with just a drop to make the spell uniquely yours. Animal blood was historically used in rural magic, especially when slaughtering for food. It was offered to land spirits, ancestors, and crossroad guardians. However, most modern ethics discourage this practice unless one is steeped in a cultural tradition that still honors it responsibly. Hecate was oftentimes offered sacrifices of black animals, dogs especially, but cats as well, and also sometimes black female lambs, because there was a belief that sacrifices given to the gods would be resurrected to live alongside the gods. So they didn't fret too much about this. They didn't think that they were ending the creature's life, rather giving it a new life alongside the gods. With Hecate, we have a few specific writings where she distinctly resurrects those sacrificed or killed in her honor, and sometimes even those just killed in an area that she happens to be near. Santa Muerte is honored with red wine or blood-like offerings by some followers, although it's not traditional across the board as far as I know. Santa Muerte fascinates me, but I don't know too much about her yet. But I will be changing that very soon. What I know for sure is that blood spells are very serious. They forge bonds, they demand attention, and they should never be done lightly. And always with the full consent, intention, and clarity of those involved. The practice of feeding plants with blood, milk, or other offerings is an ancient but controversial form of plant magic. Some traditions, particularly those with animistic roots, believe that a few drops of one's blood can help one to form a connection to that plant. I have been told that some plant medicine facilitators will offer their blood to the plants they're bringing to others before the ceremony, which totally makes sense in my world. In various folk practices, offerings are sometimes poured at the base of sacred plants to strengthen the connection to the spirits or the deity that plant is sacred to. This practice is tied to the idea that plants have consciousness and can be fed to amplify their energy. Throughout history, people have treated plants not just as resources, but as living spirits, as guardians, and as allies. Many cultures believed that for a plant to reach its full potential, whether in healing, protection, or divination, it needed to be fed in return for its gifts. One of the most striking examples of this is the practice of feeding plants with blood. And this may sound macabre to modern ears, but as we touched on, in ancient times, blood was seen as the essence of life, a bridge between the human world and the unseen forces of nature. In some European folk traditions, wounded warriors were said to bleed onto the roots of sacred trees after battle, offering their strength and life force to the land in return for healing. In Norse mythology, the world tree, Yggdrasil, was believed to be nourished by sacrifices of blood, sweat, and spirit. And then there's the fascinating connection between witches and the infamous mandrake root. The mandrake, with its humanoid-shaped root, was believed to absorb the energy of the living. Some legends even suggested that to properly awaken its power, one had to feed it blood, milk, or even bury it with a dead animal to strengthen its spirit. Now that we've gone over some of the history of these traditional offerings, I'd like to establish that offerings should be a conversation and not a transaction. With the exception of deity contracts, especially in Norse traditions. Usually, though, you don't give milk or honey or blood to buy results. You give offerings to form connection, to show respect, and to feed the unseen. So before you make any kind of offering, know who you're offering to. Know what they like and what they don't like. Dispose of offerings respectfully. Pour into the earth. Leave at a crossroads or bury near roots. Although some folks do like to say, depending on what the offering is for and whom it's to, something along the lines of, "Hey, so-and-so, I am going to dispose of this offering. Please take what you want of it. I will be removing it from the altar very soon." And then they just throw it in the trash. That's okay too. It's really up to what feels best for you, as long as you're doing it with respect. Next, you need to be clear. Speak aloud. Name the gift. Name your intent with the gift, with the offering. And don't over-offer. Spirits especially can be overfed, just like humans, and that is something you definitely want to avoid. With any offering, make a ritual of it. Treat it as sacred, and the mind and heart will follow. When trying any ritual involving offerings that you don't necessarily feel are sacred, the ritualization can often be the gateway that lets you peer through the veil and gain a new perspective. Many of us eat bread every single day. Not me, because I have a gluten allergy, unfortunately, but it is a everyday part of our life. So it might not feel like a sacred thing to us anymore at this point in time. The ritualization of it can bring in the magic to that piece of bread, can transform it into something bigger, something grander, and something more fitting for the ancestors, the gods, and the spirits. We are approaching the end of the episode today. I know I've given you a bit of information, but today I'd like to leave you with a closing spell. This spell can be read or listened to with any offering that you might want to give for whatever reason you see fit. Some wonderful reasons could be a full body, mind, and spirit cleansing, to connect, to honor, to remember, to ask for an audience, to ask advice, to ask for clarity, to embrace, to release, or so many other great reasons. If you would like to engage with this spell I am going to offer you, prepare yourself and then prepare your offering. Perhaps a cup of warm milk and honey, and depending on what your offering reason is, maybe a drop of your blood. You can offer this to the earth, your deity of choice, your spirit of choice, or the ancestors, whatever is calling to you and works with your practice. Go ahead and gather your offering, gather yourself, and prepare, and then say the following spell. Milk for the mothers, white as bone, spilled in fields or hearths of stone, flowing soft from breast to bowl, the first enchantment of the soul. Honey for sweetness, golden bright, stored in combs and dreams at night, bee-spun sun and lover's kiss, a sugared thread 'tween gods and bliss. Blood for the oath, the iron red, poured for spirit, kin and dead, a heartbeat's echo, raw and true, given once and bound to you. So feed the gods with sacred breath, with life and sweetness, birth and death, and let the veil be thin as lace when offerings hold their rightful place. That is all I have for you today, dear listener. If you enjoyed this spell, it will be available on my Patreon, where you can subscribe for $1 and receive all of my offerings, or opt for one-time purchases to download any of the printable grimoire pages I already have up, along with this spell, and so much more. If you enjoy the show, please share it with a friend or leave a review. They really help the show, and on Apple Podcasts specifically, reviews help other people find the show. So those are so very appreciated while the show is growing. If you'd like to contact me, you'll find all the ways you can do that in the show notes. But until next time, my name is Wishamaya. Don't forget to keep your roots deep and your dreams wild.